running and stomping on seniors. This lady broke her nose, bleeding. Are you kidding me?
Crowds and chaos. Thousands of people line up to get free grocery money from the government, and it turned into a stampede.
People are dying here, they're suffering here, and that's not, the true story is not being told. We see it every day.
Relief and response, more deaths, and a deepening crisis in Puerto Rico. Some from the front lines of relief are here with us live.
Well, listen carefully. That is the sonic attack, the sound that sickened U.S. diplomats in Cuba and soured relations between Washington and Havana.
Good morning. Great to have you with us today. We take a look today at the deepening post-storm crisis in Puerto Rico with South Floridians just back from firsthand work there. But we begin with a mess over money across Miami-Dade and Broward and Monroe counties. And what a mess it has been. Enormous crowds turned out starting last Wednesday to get government money to pay for food they lost during Hurricane Irma. And those people overwhelmed the process. So many people showed up yesterday that one DSNAP center, as they're called, in Miami-Dade was shut down, and all three were shut down in Broward out of safety concerns. 3 Miami-Dade sites are the only ones that remain open today. Local 10's Ian Margol is there at one of them in Northwest Miami-Dade. Ian set the scene today for us.
Well, Glenna, Michael, we have seen thousands and thousands of people here, some of them coming well before the sun rose this morning, some of them coming yesterday afternoon. But we want to show you this. Right behind us, this is where the tents are. This is where people are actually signing up. But the reason we were facing the other way, if you take a look past where I was standing and you see all of these umbrellas, that's because there are still thousands of people in line at this point waiting to sign up for this government assistance. Thousands of people showed up at the Miami-Dade College North Campus early Sunday morning before the sun rose. Some even coming Saturday afternoon to try to get a good spot. All of them, though, are signing up for DSNAP benefits, which are basically food stamps for people who don't normally qualify for food stamps. And everyone here had some sort of loss because of the hurricane.
We did not have lights for over a week. I have 2 refrigerators and a freezer. I lost at least $800 to $1,000 in food stuff.
Sunday morning, 3 locations opened in Miami-Dade. The Hialeah Amelia Earhart Park location remaining closed. Up in Broward, all of the locations are closed, and even those Broward residents who made their way down to Miami-Dade were still being turned away. Now you're hearing that you guys aren't going to be able to go. What are you thinking?
I don't know. I don't know if I should stay, whatever, I don't know what I'm going to do.
And you've been waiting how long?
Oh, since it's 9 o'clock last night.
So many people actually showed up here. They started turning some people away again. Once these parking lots totally filled up, you could see how far they were snaking. And we have all of this information about the places that are open, the places that are closed, what you need when you come to these facilities as well, all on our website, local10.com. Michael, Glenna.
Ian, thanks, and we are going to be efforting to find out how all of the people who need will be accommodated eventually. Thank you, Ian.
And we are also going to talk about this on our roundtable. But now back to Puerto Rico, where today the number of dead has sadly reached 48. Most of the island still without electricity, and about 40% of the people there have no access to clean running water. Situation is even worse in rural parts of the island.
We'll talk all about that with our guests today. Luis de Rosa, president of the Puerto Rican Chamber of Commerce of South Florida. Judy Schechter is chair of pediatrics at the University of Miami Medical School and part of a team of doctors just back from a medical relief mission to Puerto Rico. And Robert Asensio, a first-term state representative from Kendall and a retired police captain who was also just in Puerto Rico on a recovery effort. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Good morning.
Coming in,
Great to have you here. Dr. Schechter, you were just back from Puerto Rico. Give us your assessment. What did you see on the ground there?
So six of us went. There were residents in training as well as Puerto Rican doctors who had trained there and now work with us at the University of Miami. And we really wanted to have tactile contact with the people we'd been in touch with.
Face-to-face, touching, hands-on.
So they split us into 3 groups. We went to Canavas, which is one of the areas that has had some leptospirosis. I went into Peñones and saw patients there. The areas had flooding. Every family that I saw was not yet in their own home, but were living with 2 or 3 other families. We took care of of kids who, some of whom hadn't had health care for quite some time, not just this month. Almost all of their ailments started about a month ago, and when you press them, that meant since the storm.
Right. Since the storm, ailments that have to do with unclean water or lack of medical supplies, lack of antibiotics, those kind of things.
So everything. So part of our efforts were prevention, teamed up with the University of Pediatric Hospital there, to teach people how to do cleanliness, hand hygiene, and else when you don't have clean water. So hand sanitizers and the importance of that and how often to use that, and even wipes in the settings of toddlers and diapers and whatnot, which they don't have anymore, by the way.
Yeah. If you can, tell us lay people, what is leptospirosis? How do you treat it? 4 people, the last figure I saw was 4 people have died of leptospirosis in Puerto Rico, and maybe 10 more are suspected of having it.
So this is an infection that for many people they won't know they have leptospirosis because it can start as really a flu-like symptom with fevers, muscle aches, headache. And if you have that, particularly in the situation we have in Puerto Rico right now, you're not going to get tested, which is a blood test. They just don't have the infrastructure to do that. Right. But it can advance and cause very serious symptoms, including meningitis, the tissues around the brain. It can affect the liver, turn people yellow with jaundice. It can affect the kidneys and totally shut that down to the point of needing dialysis.
Excuse me, and this is caused by exposure to water that has animal urine in it, is that correct? Yes,
usually it has, to get to humans, it has to be a mammal urine. Usually that's rats or mice. And one can imagine that given that we don't have clean water, but we also have trash accumulated, contaminated, food that is rotting, there may be increased numbers of that. If the water supply isn't covered, that small amount of urine that you don't see is enough to infect a person.
Something that I don't think, I mean, the crisis is deepening in so many ways, not getting better. Robert Asensio, you were there. A lot of the relief goes into the cities where planes can land. Did you have the opportunity to get out into some of the outlying rural areas? What do you know from there?
Yeah, my visit mainly constituted going into San Juan, and we were there to deliver medical supplies. As a matter of fact, when we delivered 7,000 pounds of supplies, there was a couple of people that were in need of surgery that were dependent on those supplies coming in. So I'm glad and proud to say that we were able to help them.
These were supplies, Robert, that were collected here in South Florida. They were volunteered. This was a gift. I mean, this was the charity of people in South Florida.
It's very important to point out that during this crisis, humanitarian crisis, there's been a groundswell of public and private donations, mainly public. We've collected, or the organizations that I'm working with have collected millions of pounds of supplies, critical needs supplies that they need over in Puerto Rico, the hygiene kits that the doctor just spoke about, Pampers, diapers. But a lot of it gets stuck in the bureaucracy. And when I went to Puerto Rico, that's why we went. We delivered specifically to San Juan, met with the mayor and some people from EMS to be able to fast track it to the hospitals.
So go into that a little bit before Luis Duros, I want to bring you into this conversation too, so please add to this if you know. There are so many organizations, from small 1 or 2 people collecting to big South Florida organizations in a sustained effort. How does all of that material get to where it needs to go if there is this bureaucracy? What is this process?
Yeah. Right now, the best way to describe it is that it's government at its worst, plain and simple. But the supplies are getting to those entities that are needing it if they're earmarked or they're tagged and they're labeled to an NGO, non-government organization, or a mayor. And this way they have a destination to go to. What happened in this effort was that a lot of people began to donate, as everyone wants to help. Most people want to help. And in donating, there was a rash of, let's just get supplies to Puerto Rico.
Yeah, and if I may, Luis, a lot of those supplies initially arrived at the port of San Juan, and those containers sat at the port for several days before anything could be distributed.
Yeah, that's right. But I'm happy to say that Manor Wynwood allowed us to use 50,000 square feet of their garage space, their warehouse space, I'm sorry, and we were able to pull together the community and collect thousands upon thousands. In fact, we shipped to Puerto Rico over 523 pallets within 2 weeks span with DHL and some of the private sector who actually donate. The issue again is the bureaucracy. So now we're talking to the National Guard of Puerto Rico, who are targeted in terms of their responsibility in making sure the hospitals are first, seniors are second, children are third, and the families, of course, are included in that equation.
Okay, so it lands. Who does that?
Well, the private sector, for the most part, at this point, have been doing that.
So it's not government bureaucracy then?
When it gets there, the bureaucracy is in charge. And if you land in the port, it is under the jurisdiction, if I'm correct, is the port of San Juan is under San Juan government. Is that correct?
It's under the Puerto Rican government, the island government. But here's the thing: what organizations like We Do Better, Third Wave Volunteers, what they've done is they've set up outliers or receiving places in the outer parts of the island. They've communicated directly with the mayors of the different municipalities. And they've arranged the supplies, once they get to the island, earmarked for them, titled for them, they get distributed directly to them, and then they get them out into the public.
Right.
Can I add to that just
Sure.
a little bit? So we also have a warehouse at the University of Miami, particularly when the American Academy of Pediatrics asked me, where can we send national donations? And so then we work with an organization, another NGO called Direct Relief, and they bring that feet on the ground with those planes and bring them in. When I was at the University Pediatric Hospital, they do the same thing, but then even more micro. So not only do they have they took a conference center where they do education, completely changed it, have volunteers, they bring all the supplies in, they use what they need, but they know everybody else on the island. So when they call up and a Dr. X, who we wouldn't know, says, I need albuterol and I need insulin, they can get that to that person right away.
So do you have a call going out based on what you're hearing and what these doctors are saying they need? Is there a way to put that call out so that those are the donations that are coming in?
Yes, I think a lot of us are doing that sort of in parallel. So we get that. I share that with other folks at the University of Miami who are working hard at this, and we pair up with our partners. I saw Project Hope when I was there. AmeriCares is there and working with them. AmeriCares is also working with this national group of the American Academy of Pediatrics. So a lot of us are trying to solve the problem when the bureaucracy is stuck as it is.
So I want to point something out if I can. Let me jump in here, because if you notice what Luis LaRosa just mentioned, he mentioned a couple names of organizations. The doctor mentioned a couple names of organizations. I mentioned. These are non-government entities that have come together to fill the void, to get the goods out to the Puerto Rican community. We're almost 30 days post-storm, and yet parts of the island have not received the adequate care that they need. And it's like kicking the can down the line, because the more you wait, the greater the urgency is, and the more needs.
Because they can't figure out logistics to get there?
Because roads and bridges are washed out? Or
because of the damage.
One of the things we called for initially, right, was we have the best satellite systems. Post-storm, immediately passing the storm, we have stat shots. We know the damage, level of damage. We can assess it very quickly. So what we were calling for, and I say we, some of us elected and some people in the community, we were calling for this deployment or distribution of goods to be militarized. That should have been done from the beginning. We should have had helicopters, airlifting items. The roads are impassable, that we know. And also, great thing to point out, Doctor, you may have some insight on this. Some of the roads that are cleared, rains continue, and then you have mudslides, continued mudslides.
It's such a complex situation. It's going to go on for a while. And our conversation about Puerto Rico is going to go on, so take a deep breath, everybody. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back live in our studio this morning. Experts on Puerto Rico. And Luis LaRosa, let me turn to you and say, if the island, if 80% of the island, and that's an estimate, doesn't have electricity, that is key to recovery. How is the recovery going to be speeded up without rebuilding the electric system?
Well, that's the key. I think the Army Corps of Engineers are in Puerto Rico now as we speak, who are working on the electric grid. The issue for most people is the logistics. How can we get from A to B? And that's the question that everyone wants an answer to. It's going to become very difficult. We need the government of Puerto Rico to cooperate with the National Guard that's in Puerto Rico at this point, and of course the FEMA experts to get the job done right away. There is a need in Puerto Rico, not only from a medical perspective, but also from a humanitarian perspective, which people are actually falling behind. We have people in Sidra, which is right above Caguas, who have not received any help whatsoever. They have to go on long lines. Now, think of the senior. The seniors can't line up. They don't have the energy for that, so it's very difficult. So it's got to be a private government collaboration that we believe is starting to unfold now as we speak.
Right.
And I'm happy to see that the Representative Asensio has been going to Puerto Rico, and I think he's going to go again to continue those conversations, how we can help you help yourself.
You know, during the break, we are on Facebook Live as well, and during the break we had a question about the Jones Act. Robert Asensio, the Jones Act essentially mandates that U.S. flagged ships are the ones that take supplies back and forth across, and that was suspended for 10 days to help the relief effort and now is back in practice. Where is that going?
Well, I'd like to see it lifted. Certainly in a humanitarian crisis like this, and not just Puerto Rico, right? We have to mention that the U.S. Virgin Islands, many of the islands were hit as well.
Yeah.
So whereas the Jones Act doesn't help distribution on the island, it certainly helps get items, much needed items. And if it's just lifted for 10 days, think about those ships that are coming from far distances. That takes them at least 10 days to arrive. So Louis just mentioned something that was very important. This cannot be a sole government operation or restoration. It has to be a public-private venture. The positive thing is that we see a lot of companies, a lot of big organizations coming to the table with sustainable power. Louis, at the warehouse, we had a generator, a solar power generator, that it was donated, privately donated. It's on a trailer that's maybe 25 feet long. Well, that solar generator can power about 25,000 homes. At one clip. Those are microgrids. And we're going to have to look at really innovative processes to be able to bring that island back online and stabilize the infrastructure.
And another issue for us, of course, is the Puerto Ricans that are arriving to the mainland.
I was just going to bring that up. You can't have this conversation without a mass migration change.
The latest figure reported today was 38,000 Puerto Ricans have already arrived here in Florida since the storm, and they're going to be escaping, I mean, in huge numbers.
No, I agree with you, and it is a crisis that we're taking very seriously. Now we're asking our local government to use some of our local tax, especially the Governor Rick Scott, to think in terms of funding a Puerto Rican response office, maybe through the chamber or some other, a viable organization, so we can start servicing the families that are arriving with various services, job placement, hopefully housing referrals, legal, medical services. We got a group called the Puerto Rican Leadership Council, which is made up of the Puerto Rican Bar, Professor, Puerto Rican Medical Center, providing free medical services. So there's a need, and there's a crisis that's going to come. We want the governor to step up to the plate and fund this office. If you can give away, the governor can give away $300 million to a private company to come into this great state of ours, our tax money, $1 out of $1 million or $500,000 for a Puerto Rican response.
What do you see? Are you
so helping folks that are coming here was one of our missions too on the trip we took, because we wanted to see what are the families experiencing right now. We know that it may actually get a little bit worse. I think the middle of last week, 250 students had registered at Miami-Dade schools, and we expect that that's going to slowly go up for those who can get a plane ticket over. But we do anticipate that there will be real health needs for them, and very much so the mental health needs. And so to be able to understand what they're living through now, what their trauma is.
And just to point out something else, because yes, they have specific needs, but we also have to ensure that we prepare the state to ease the burden. Because them coming over is not necessarily bad, because they come into our economy and they'll start spending, so it'll help, grow our.
So that was kind of going to be Luis, with what you're seeing. My question would be, is this a short-term, temporary plan for these families, or are families resettling?
I think it's a combination, possibly of both, to be quite frank. But you still have families in Puerto Rico, they own property in Puerto Rico, they have their roots in Puerto Rico, have their parents in Puerto Rico, have their history. And they're rooted in Puerto Rico, will go back to Puerto Rico. But you do have a sizable percentage that are going to resettle in the state of Florida.
And I think there are a million, excuse me, Luis, there are a million Puerto Ricans who live in Florida right now, mainly around Orlando, but a big community here.
I'd like to point something out about your numbers. 38,000, that doesn't include the ones that have gone to Chicago or New York, or the ones that have come in on private charter, which has been a sizable amount of people.
You're talking post-storm?
Yes, post-storm.
Yeah. Robert, let me ask you, on Friday, President Trump restated emphatically his support for Puerto Rico. He said, we're going to be there as long as it takes. But earlier, he had a tweet in which he sort of blamed Puerto Rico. He said electric and all infrastructure was a disaster before the hurricanes. There's been a total lack of accountability. At one point, responding to the mayor of San Juan, he said Puerto Ricans want us to do everything for them. The president didn't sound like this when he talked about Florida or Texas after Irma.
That's right.
That's very disturbing because we've already seen signs, and part of the need is helping these people with housing and jobs. So we've already seen signs of, we can cite examples of Puerto Ricans that just came over a week ago, and they're already employed. They want to be employed. With regard to the island, you know, I don't think anybody wants a handout. I really think that they want to sustain themselves. So much so that a few months ago, Louis, correct me if I'm wrong, a few months ago, there was a vote on the island where the populace, the majority of the population, voted for statehood. So they too would like to become a state.
I don't think there's really denying that the problems economically that the island had prior to the storm hamper and government decisions, inadequate decisions, are hampering relief efforts.
And we also are experiencing that in South Florida as well. I mean, look, a regular storm, a regular rain, your transformer goes out. You know, we have those issues here as well.
Sure.
So I think pointing out, if I may just add, excuse me, I'm sorry, Doc, just pointing out that it is offensive for the President of the United States to look at 3.5 million Americans and blame them for the storm and the devastation by Hurricane Maria. That is wrong. That is not responsible. He doesn't do it with Texas. I understand Texas, I don't know how many electric votes he has in Texas, how many in Florida, I think it's over 30. But you know what? Puerto Ricans vote here. They vote in New York and Chicago in big and sizable numbers, and we're really taking this very serious, and it's very irresponsible for him to blame Puerto Ricans.
Dr. Schechter, very quickly, make your point.
72 out of 78 municipalities had healthcare shortages to begin with. So the damage was there before the storm. That part is true. That doesn't mean that we are to leave people without water and food.
Of course.
This, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness begins with sustainability.
Boy, there's a good point on which to end. Boy, I like that. All right, Louis DeRosa, Dr. Judy Schechter, Representative Robert Asensio, thanks for coming in. Thank you. Up next, it is Election Day in Venezuela. Governors are being elected there across the country.
And we're taking you live to Maracaibo. That's next.
In Venezuela today, millions of people are expected to go to the polls and vote. These are gubernatorial elections. Venezuelans will elect governors in all 23 of their states. The opposition hopes to make some big gains.
But as you might expect, this election has been fairly controversial. There are people who are saying that Venezuela's government opposition has actually let that whole protest movement collapse. And for the latest right here, right now, we turn to Local 10's Cody Weddle in Maracaibo among those voting. Cody.
Hey, Glenna and Michael, good morning to you guys. That's right, I'm at a polling place here in Maracaibo. Right behind me here, behind that wall is a voting center, and that's, well, it's a school. They use it as a voting center, and that's where people are voting. We've come to this polling station because this is where we expect the opposition candidate here, Tomas Guanipa, to arrive any second now and cast his vote. Now, this state, Zulia, which is where we are located, is a very important state, and it would be a big get for the opposition. That's because this is the biggest producer of oil in the country. This state also has a long border with Colombia. It's also the most populated state. So the opposition would love to win this state. It's currently in the hands of the government. In fact, 18 of the 23 governorships here are in the hands of the government. Now, the opposition hopes perhaps today they could flip that scenario and win 18 of the 23 governorships. But to do that, they will need to have high turnout today from their base. And that is not a given because many of their base has expressed apathy, disinterest towards these elections. Many of them have even criticized their own leadership, saying that they never should have participated in these elections because this is a dictatorship, and in a dictatorship, the results won't be respected. So the opposition has done everything it can to try to turn out voters today and send a signal to President Nicolas Maduro. That's the big question. How many people will turn out today at the polling stations we've been to? We've seen a steady trickle of people, but it certainly hasn't been anything overwhelming. It's hard to judge, of course, from one polling station how many people will turn up. Another problem here is the ballot. It's very confusing today, and the opposition says that is part of a government tactic to confuse voters today. There's actually several opposition parties on the ballot, and they have to know which one to vote for, so their vote is actually cast for the opposition. Guys?
Let me ask you, if in fact the opposition does well or fairly well today, will the Maduro government recognize and acknowledge those victories?
That's a really good question, Michael. President Nicolas Maduro has said that the governors who win today will have to be sworn in front of the Constitutional Assembly. That's the body that's going to rewrite the Constitution, and that the opposition here doesn't recognize. All of the governors have said they will not recognize that Constitutional Assembly as well. So what will happen if they refuse to be sworn in front of that body? Why do they have to be sworn in front of that body? Also, the government could use the Supreme Court to overturn their rulings. The state legislature will still be in the hands of the government for most of the states. So there certainly are many government options to try to neutralize any of the opposition candidates who win today.
Much to watch both on the surface and below. Cody, thanks. We'll check in with you during the vote. Up next, we take all the big topics of the week to the roundtable. Stay with us.
All right, it is that time again for a closer, more perhaps analytical look at the news of the week with our Powerhouse Roundtable, and we've got a good one.
Edginess. Mark Caputo, Florida correspondent for Politico and author of the daily Politico Florida Playbook. H.T. Smith, Miami attorney, law professor, no longer Twitterless, and longtime South Florida civil rights leader. And Marilee Cancio, Miami-based attorney, a broadcast analyst, and Republican Party activist. And all veterans of the Roundtable. Good morning.
Good morning. Great to have you here.
Well, you know what we want to start with today are the DSNAP is the acronym, Food for Florida is the program name, and this weekend sites for that grocery money for storm victims have been shut down because of the mass chaos. Marilee, I know you've been watching what's going on. What has happened to this program? Where did that go wrong?
Well, I was surprised as anybody else. Over 300,000 families have already received assistance. It's a program by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that here in the state of Florida, they work with DCF.
That's who administers
Correct.
the program.
And so supposedly families had to register online at myflfamilies.com/FFF, which is Food for Florida. That's how the DSNAP program is called in Florida. For families that don't already receive food stamps, and they need to receive the debit card where they would put the money, well, some families could receive up to $650 for a family of 4, and they would give this for 2-3 months. So it's a lot of money for a lot of families.
That's why they made everyone stand online to get that card.
Right, and I think we've seen that they suspended the program in some places as a result of security, safety, and health concerns.
Well, as a matter of fact, in Broward County, they suspended all of them. This is a great program. As soon as I heard that it was going through the Department of Children and Families, DCF, I said, uh-oh, we got a major problem. We see what they're doing with regard to our children. And the reports that we have with regard to children.
Supposedly they have 5,900 people working on the field, but it's, remember, the hurricane hit the entire state. We have 23 million people.
And therefore they need to organize it even better. This is a wonderful program. People really need it, and this is bottlenecked again as a result of
Mark,
the DCF.
On Thursday, Glenna covered the story on Friday at one of these processing centers. I was at C.B. Smith Park in Pembroke Pines on Thursday, and I was just stunned, staggered by the amount of people, lines as far as you could see, people waiting in the heat, the rain, some people passing out because of the heat. And I think the DCF honestly was doing the best it could, but they were overwhelmed. But what really is staggering to me, and perhaps I'm naive, is the need of people here for a couple of $100 to $1,000 because they had food that rotted in their refrigerator, and they just need help.
Well, to plug Politico Florida Playbook, last week when I was putting it together, I saw stories out of Tampa. I saw them out of Brevard County.
Oh, it's statewide.
And I saw them out of South Florida. And it got in the back of my mind. I still have holes in my ceiling I've just kind of patched with plywood. I can take care of myself. But I know that our economy in the state is kind of a Potemkin village. Like, Florida looks great, and there's always this kind of sunshine state promise. that we have. But right beneath the surface and behind those facades are great amounts of need, trouble. The jobs that we always talk about that are here and growing, they're not very good jobs, and people aren't getting paid a lot of money, and we're seeing the results of that.
And that's, you know, that is such a great point, because if you talk to people on those lines, and, you know, is this worth getting up before sunrise and standing in this unhealthy heat for 12 hours to get essentially a month of groceries? And
absolutely. It's worth it.
It's worth it.
Well,
people got to eat.
It is worth it. And in Miami-Dade and Broward, by the time, well, it will be continued this coming week. It's, as you said, HT, it's not happening today in Broward for safety concerns, because BSO doesn't have enough deputies to send out to these sites. There are 3 sites in Miami-Dade that are open today. Go to local10.com and you'll find out where they are. Marilee, I have to say, in our office, we looked at these lines, and there were some people who looked and said, this is why Donald Trump was elected, because we've got freeloaders. Some of them are freeloaders who want to get in and just get government money. Now, is that fair, unfair? What do you think?
No, I think that's completely unfair. I think there's people with need, otherwise they wouldn't be standing on that line, Michael. And I think anybody that would put themselves, I saw a lot of elderly people, families that are really struggling. So I think that is a completely unfair statement.
You know, you're going to always have some freeloaders, but the overwhelming majority of these people are really hurting. And I think what Mark said is accurate. You know, I was shocked as I looked around and saw with all over the state of Florida, we have these people hurting. These are our fellow citizens, and we've got to find a way that's effective and efficient to get the help to the people who really need it.
I just want to finish a thought that I didn't get to finish before. There's like a corollary. There are people in need, and those people genuinely felt like they were needy. My question is it the storm that put them in need? And I'm not sure it is in those lines all around the state. And so that's what brings up a more basic question.
I do think that it is, Glenn, because a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck. And
prior
when you don't get a
storm.
paycheck for 1 or 2 weeks, then you're stuck.
Of course.
And small businesses that couldn't write that check, I mean, if they haven't gone and applied to loans, I think they couldn't pay their employees.
Right. So
and
the point
problem.
being is that had DCF or USDA didn't realize how close to the edge so many people are in this state and expect that kind of turnout, that to me was problematic.
Yeah, so as you say,
and I think it's a good way to talk about positive things. You know, how do we help people make more money? How do we make small businesses have more money in their pockets? I think tax reform, job creation, all those things that Washington could be working on.
We should point out, just as a reporter here, that in addition to having food rotting in your refrigerator, wanting to, could need help to replace it, this was also for people, a waitress who couldn't get to her diner or to her restaurant, or for a lawn service guy who lost some equipment. So there is a wider kind of definition of who qualifies.
And one more group.
Who's that?
People who actually worked, but the business couldn't pay them.
Yeah.
Storm-related damage.
Not to bring everything back to politics, but Governor Rick Scott did very well at the beginning of the storm, the lead up, and getting people to evacuate. But what we've learned with hurricanes, it's not the storm that gets you, it's the aftermath.
Right.
And the aftermath of the storm has built in some future challenges potentially for Governor Rick Scott if he decides to run for Senate. You have controversies over debris removal. You have this controversy over the way in which DCF has administered the SNAP program, And you also have those nursing home deaths that we had in Hollywood Hills. Right. Now, I'm not saying Rick Scott is to blame for all of them, but there are a number of cases that Democrats are slowly bringing up as evidence, they say, of Scott not doing the job that, say, Governor Jeb Bush did. In fact, there's an insiders poll by the Tampa Bay Times today where insiders and political insiders in Tallahassee throughout the state think that Governor Jeb Bush did a far better job managing the state with hurricanes than Governor Rick Scott did. Now, a lot of those are elite public opinion makers, but eventually that's going to start to trickle down.
Yeah. All right, everybody, hold your thoughts. We're going to be back with more Roundtable in just a minute.
Well, that was a wonderful way.
Oh, I wish you were here during the commercial breaks, because the Roundtable doesn't stop. And in fact, let's move on now to Obamacare and the president's announcement this week. And Mark Caputo, the president could not get Congress to repeal and replace Obamacare. So I think the that he did this week by saying that the subsidies were going to end is just his attempt to dismantle it.
That's true, but we also have to look at the fact that I'm no constitutional scholar, but the payments didn't look like they were legal anyway. So you have this kind of mungy territory of, you know, do we repeal Obamacare? Do we not? Oh, do we patch it with something that's not legal? Oh, I'm going to remove the patch that's not legal. Oh, you're trying to kill it. It's really a great example of just how utterly dysfunctional our government in Washington is.
You're absolutely right. And a federal judge held several months ago that these subsidies, the CSRs they call them, were in fact unconstitutional, and it's been appealed. But that is a court ruling.
But there's no final word until the Supreme Court rules.
Right.
You remember, with regard to the AC altogether, they had different courts saying it's constitutional and not. Now, but Steve Bannon broke the code. If there's any doubt about the purpose of this, when he spoke to the values group the other day, he said, yes, our president has in fact destroyed the health care exchanges. That was the intent of it. Think about this. Repeal and replace was for a future change of the system. He's throwing a grenade into the system to blow it up will affect thousands of people a year now. 1 million people will lose their health care.
Is it worth to say that when the Affordable Care Act was ramping up, there was great pushback about how many people would be affected too, and now the biggest critics actually are the ones who are on the exchanges of affordable health care. Mary Lee, is this just kicking it back to Congress?
And I think that's where it should be. We learned from the Obama administration that when he passed a lot of his policies through the executive orders, that now President Trump, a Republican with different policies in mind, it's changing also through executive order. I think an important thing is to say, you know what, Congress needs to act. If not in 3 or 7 years, someone else is going to come along and undo it again. We need Congress to work. If there's anybody less popular than President Trump, it's Congress, and we need Congress to act. They have to resolve the DACA problem. They have to, they have to pass immigration reform. All these Republicans that are in Washington that were elected saying that they were going to repeal and replace Obamacare and haven't done it.
Well, this is your point is a good one. This is one of several really big ticket issues that the president has said, Congress, you decide. He added another one this week when he said he wasn't going to certify the Iran nuclear deal. And essentially he said, but I'm not going to scrap it all together. Congress, you fix it.
He could have done it, and he could have scrapped it.
Well, he does have the power apparently to do it.
He has the power to do it, but that's not what he's doing. He's saying, take a look at it. Take a look at what's happening. Apparently, Iran is following the letter of the law, but they're breaking the spirit. If you hear Israel about their concerns with this Iran deal, we're living in very dangerous times. So,
but we've got to remember, this is not a bilateral deal. This is a multinational deal. The United States does not have the authority unilaterally to strike this deal. Iran is going to benefit because we're going to be not the leaders of the deal anymore. Europe is going to deal with Iran, going to trade with Iran, won't impose sanctions. China and Russia
that is the worst deal the United States could have ever done, giving all that money to
you say give that money. It was their money. It was their money.
It was the
we were holding it. We didn't give them any of our money.
Let's give it in green and cash.
I'm just saying, if we're going to bind ourselves in the future, Congress should approve it. If we're going to make it a treaty and it wasn't done.
I agree.
I think to Mary Lee's point, it's if you live by executive action, you're going to die by it. Yeah. And Democrats are experiencing that.
If we can, one other thing the president did or said this week that I think is hopeful is that he told a senator from Oklahoma that when it comes to DACA and the Dreamers, if Congress hasn't fixed that issue with immigration reform by March, he will extend the right of Dreamers to stay and won't deport them. I think that's good news.
I guess, but Congress just sucks. And that's the problem. And no, it
Tell
really.
Us how you really feel.
Well, no, it just does. And
you see the headlines now.
And just at a certain point, they're just not doing their jobs, and they go on vacation all the time. Like, why these guys fight so hard to become congressmen so they can do nothing and get paid.
But Mark,
big
the president calls the swamp. I think it's a sewer. Because
yes, but I'm really surprised to
we
hear
have headlines
an
all over the place.
experienced political news person like Michael Putney actually believing what the president said. You actually believe him?
What about DACA?
Well, about anything.
I'm not saying I believe him. I'm saying it's an encouraging moment.
That he said it.
On the other hand, he wants to revoke the license of NBC. That's
Right.
not good
Has
news.
anyone noticed the sea change that has just taken
We got to
over?
go by what this president does. You cannot.
How about action?
We cannot
how about
go.
action? How about results? How about having the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans in 17 years? That is a fact.
And that's,
I think
that's
very
because of the
good
Obama
positive
policies that
actions.
were put in place. Because you can look
The
at not
stock
one
market- the
economic
stock market
policy.
never reached 20,000 under President
Not
Obama.
one
It's
economic
almost
policy. Name a
23,000.
economic policy he put in
It's-
place.
It's exactly
Name
because-
one policy he put in
You
place.
know,
I'm going to jump in.
Name one.
This will go on, but
time is
our
up.
time is up.
We should have
But
alcohol
we
next
just
time.
we just having
That
fun.
is just getting good.
No.
Facebook, stay with us. All right, it's television and still to come when government assistance goes terribly wrong.
What are you guys?
Take a look at this, a beautiful day from our Mount Sinai Medical Center cam.
And for a professional view on the weather, let's go to meteorologist Jennifer Correa with the Sunday forecast. Jen, good morning or good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon, Michael and Glenna. Definitely a beautiful day. Here's another live view at a Hollywood beach cam. As you can see, it is definitely a beach day. That rip current risk is down to a low level. It is slight, so enjoy the beach. It's a good day to head out. We don't have much rain on the radar, maybe a shower or two. Temperatures warming up to 88 degrees already. Those winds out of the east, anywhere between 5 to up to 10 miles per hour. So rain chance stays low for the rest of today. Tomorrow, similar forecast just like today, keeping the rain chance at 30%. A cold front heads our way Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's the best time we'll see the showers, and then it dries out by Friday and next weekend. Glenna.
Interesting temperatures for a cold front. Thanks, Jen. As we speak, a process for disaster aid has become a disaster here and around Florida this weekend. We've been talking about that.
People were running and stomping on seniors.
That was at the site in Pembroke Pines this weekend, among 10 sites in Broward, Miami-Dade, and Monroe, where tens of thousands of people spent entire days on lines for what was ultimately a 5-minute process to receive a debit card with grocery money. A man at the Hialeah site sent me this epic rant.
It's apparent that they had no idea or any level of competency to be able to organize this thing the way that it was supposed to. Did you think you were just going to open up today and 20,000 people were not going to show up?
Those are just a few samples of people consumed with anger and disgust at what they went through to obtain some government aid. The Food for Florida money is essentially a month's or two worth of grocery money offered to people with certain income limits, whose food spoiled, who lost days at work, etc., because of Hurricane Irma. More than 1 million Floridians have endured long waits in damaging heat to claim it. Clearly, there is a need. But one question is that need storm-related? Based on conversations with people in line, some of whom had skipped work, they said, to be there, their need, their hard times, they were there even before Hurricane Irma. And that speaks to a larger, more profound issue in our community. Some said if government is giving out money, it's their right to claim it. And that's true if they qualify. One fraud investigator told me they did find people giving false information trying to claim free money. The point is the process has gone so wrong on so many levels. Despite the crowds, a DCF organizer said they were not overwhelmed. Well, if that's true, they plan to make people wait hours outside in October heat and humidity, really? Some who are truly in need just can't do that. We heard from a 70-year-old woman on oxygen living on a fixed income who wouldn't even try. Bottom line, government assistance to the most vulnerable among us is pretty critical. This program's organization, or lack thereof, is clearly inadequate and leaves so many questions that we'll try to answer those questions in the weeks to come. So what do you think? We invite you to weigh in on any topic you like. Email, Facebook, Twitter. We're all right here.
So write to us, we'll write back. Stay informed, get involved, have a great Sunday. Go Dolphins!